Okay, so good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to this Global Faculty Development Workshop. Hang on, we've got a bit of a problem with the display. Cecilia, this is not displaying correctly, I think. Okay, thank you. All right, so my apologies. So welcome everybody. For those of you who haven't been to one of our Global Faculty Development events before, so we are an initiative at the University of Tokyo that tries to provide support and help to all faculty who are teaching courses in languages other than Japanese. We have a number of different programs. So we held many events like this on a wide variety of topics. Some of you may have joined us last week for our workshop then. Cecilia, could you go back to the other slide and I'll discuss this one in a moment. Okay, thank you. So we have a number of programs that may be of use to faculty in that we can provide resources to help you enhance your teaching activities. So for example, we have the Look program, which allows you to, we provide financial support for attending conferences around the world in topics related to education. We can, during the pandemic, we've been providing registration for etc. for virtual online conferences, so that's also possible. And if you apply for that, it's very easy. You visit our website, you can download an application form, and we will hopefully be able to support you. And then when you've attended the conference, we ask you to come back and give us a short presentation and write a short report about your experiences at the event. We can also provide support for visiting, for example, other universities around the world to learn about their educational system. We also have, for example, the taste program, where we can provide small amounts of money for you to trial out new activities, particularly active learning based activities in the classroom, and we can provide various levels of support. And we recently introduced a new program, OWLS, where you can try to organize workshops yourself that you're interested in. We can provide support for helping you deliver those workshops either in person or online. So if you are interested in ways in which we might be able to help you, please do visit our website using the link here. So I think next there are a few housekeeping announcements for this session. So maybe Cecilia, you could go back. So the first piece of information is that this workshop we'll be using simultaneous interpretation. So if you look at the Zoom menu bar, you should be able to select. Probably if you click it, there's a little globe icon with the word interpretation. It's probably set to off. Please choose the language, either English, Japanese, that you'd like to listen to today's session in. The interpretation is bidirectional. So feel free to ask questions in Japanese or in English, and they will be made translated into the other language for you. So if you have any problem in making the system work, it usually works flawlessly, but please contact us through the chat room and we'll try to help you solve those problems. Okay, so let me start to talk about the workshop and event. So this is going to be the first workshop, as you can see at the top of the screen there today, in a series of digital tools workshops that we are hosting over the next 3 months. This is the first in that series, and today's topic is online and offline teaching perspectives for the hybrid learning environments. And next month, on November the 10th, we will be holding the next session, which is mind mapping for information management and collaborative activities. And the final session will be on December the 8th, which is on screencasts commented screen video caption production for asynchronous activities. So we'll be having some discussion in today's session about the current status of things and teaching and learning, and why you may want to and how you may want to use digital tools in these situations. And then we will provide these more specific workshops on actually using some of these tools in your own teaching and learning. So I would also like to take the opportunity before we start to advertise our next workshop, which takes place on October the 19th. So in just under 2 weeks. And this is the second in our diversity series. I think some of you joined us last time for our first in the series with Aurora Tsai. And the second one is an introduction to supporting students with autism in higher education. And this is delivered by Alison Taylor from the United Kingdom, who's an expert in this area. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please join us. You can click the link and register for that event. So I hope to see some of you there. So I think at that point then, I'd like to introduce today's event. And I'm really delighted that today's workshop and in fact, the 3 workshops in this series will be delivered by Jean Augeri. So Jean is a kind of long-term collaborator with GFD. He's given events for us in the past, and we've had a lot of previous discussions, and he very often joins us for our weekly faculty development discussions online, which everyone is welcome to attend. And John actually back in December of 2018 delivered a course to undergraduate students at University of Tokyo on basically digital tools for learning and digital tools in the classroom. And we had discussed the idea of him taking what we thought were some of the key ideas from that. And those ideas are really perhaps most pertinent to educators and faculty. So we took the opportunity to invite him to put this series together of workshops over the next 3 months. So John is originally from France, and he's been running for a very long time region-wide faculty development initiative at Île-de-France Digital University in Paris. So since 2009, and he's also a researcher and practitioner, and he's been specializing particularly in teaching and learning tools, as we will hear about digital tools, but also environments. And he's managed a very large international comparative study on physical learning spaces since 2016. It's always great to have John join us, because being such a technical wizard with the digital tools, he always does a great job of presenting, and especially in this online environment. So I'm sure you're in for a treat hearing his workshop today. So with that, I will ask John to please take the floor. Before we do, I think John was indicating the session will last in total probably around 80 minutes or so, I think, and he's planning to schedule a break in the middle. Okay, so we understand that with it being in the evening for many people, people may have to leave early, so that is understood. Okay, but let me hand over. John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Thank you. Always the same pleasure to attend the GFD events. As you said, it's now a long-time collaboration that we have, and I'm always delighted to continue to have those very fruitful exchanges with the people of GFD, having forward-looking discussions and very practical discussions as well. And this is indeed completely the idea in which we designed the speech of today and the following ones. So indeed, coming to my presentation, the topic of today will discuss basically the perspective that we have and that we could have following the pandemic regarding learning configuration, especially the hybrid teaching configuration. And we're going to discuss that through the angle of online and offline learning spaces, online and offline learning environments. So indeed, Johnny, as Johnny mentioned, I'm coming from France, so you're gonna have to apologize me for the remaining accent that I have, despite my name. And indeed, my main position is at a consortium that is called Île-de-France Digital University, which is gathering most of the universities of Paris area, actually, and which is mutualizing a lot of things amongst the digital matters. And within those things, we have the faculty development. So indeed, we have a faculty development initiative that I'm running since 2009. And beside, as Johnny mentioned, I have a research focus, especially on learning environments and learning spaces, innovative physical learning spaces, which is a topic that we will discuss in the second half of the session of today, and which is basically the reason why Johnny and I met now quite a long time ago. But of course, beyond the question of those learning spaces, we felt very quickly, I think, that we have a similar view about the outcomes and the challenges of the evolution of teaching practices, which is the reason why we have this, once again, very pleasant and regular collaboration. I'm spending actually my time between France and Japan because during the last 5 years now, I had 6 days in Japan as visiting researcher. I'm currently very happy to have a second stay at Kyoto University. So I'm giving that speech from Kyoto right now. I'm conducting here since 10 months now, 9 months, a comparative study of the pandemic outcomes on the teaching and learning practices. So of course, many of the things we're going to discuss today are results of this study that I'm running since January. And indeed, as Johnny mentioned, I still have a wonderful memory of the stay I had at the GFD at Todai in December 2018 with that class I gave to the undergraduate students and the wonderful exchanges that I had with the GFD team. So let's dive into today's topic. So, of course, when we discuss about the pandemic and the outcomes of the pandemic, usually regarding teaching and learning practices, we have a discussion through this axis, which is face-to-face teaching and remote teaching or distant teaching. And we have a look through that axis to say that finally, in the pre-pandemic situation, we had almost 100% face-to-face teaching situation, which was the norm, which was the normal at that time. And that suddenly switched to something which was almost 100% remote or distance teaching in the pandemic situation. So to discuss this change and the perspective that we could have after the pandemic, I would like first to have a view on the faculty's stakes. As I told you, I'm running that study about the outcomes of the pandemic and the forecast that we could have regarding teaching and learning practices after the pandemic between France and Japan in a couple of months now. And indeed, there are very interesting outcomes that I would like to discuss with you. But beforehand, of course, I would like to mention this faculty development initiative that I'm running in Paris since September 2009. So it's something that is not very new anymore, of course. And this is something that for us, especially last year in 2020, considering the quite special situation in France and especially in Paris, was a laboratory really for us to evaluate what could evolve and how we could evolve in terms of teaching and learning practices. And that's, first of all, through the point of view of the faculties. So this faculty development initiative that started in September 2009 is region-wide, meaning that once again, it's covering all the universities of Paris area. It's something that is running pretty well, and actually it was running very well up to the pandemic. We had since 2009, 11,000 registration, 1,100 session organized, was working pretty well. We had an audience that was actually going beyond the area of Paris, because as you may see, so we had people coming from 45 institutions, and indeed we had a pretty international audience for the faculty development initiative through collaborations and partnerships with different universities in the world, GFD and Todai being one of the best and the most regular one we had actually. Historically speaking, this faculty development initiative was based on a face-to-face delivery. And for that, we were using 5 training centers that are designed as active learning classrooms or learning commons, in any case, as innovative physical learning environment. They look like this, okay? So we wanted to put our faculties in a quite innovative environment to teach them how to implement innovative practices as well. The philosophy in which we run this initiative is based on a complementarity between the digital tool approach and a teaching and learning practice approach. What do I mean by that? I mean that for all of the sessions that we propose in that program, we mix those two aspects. And to give you some examples, if the people want to attend session about the slideshow design, they can choose any workshops for the software they like, PowerPoint, Keynote, Prezi, whatever they want, basically. But we will always advise them to also follow a session which is more conceptual, and in that case, it's called Visual Design Principle of the Slideshow, that is explaining them what are the good practices of the slideshow, what will make a slideshow running efficiently in the pedagogical situation beyond the practice of the tools itself. So it's always this complementarity between the tool and the pedagogical practice. To give you some other example, people are coming to us, say, okay, I want to do some light video editing. Okay, but we will explain you how to use that to create your own screencast, video caption. Okay, I want to use mind mapping software. Okay, but we will explain you how you could mind mapping in collaborative activities with your students in the classroom, asynchronously, synchronously, face-to-face distance, whatever you want. So always this complementarity between digital tool and teaching and learning practice. Beside, when we have these face-to-face sessions, we always were careful to limit them in the time, 2 to 3 hours. It's not so short, but we didn't want to go beyond half a day, basically, because it's quite difficult to keep the attention of the attendees in such a long time. And on purpose, we had an individual approach which was actually consisting of having less than 12 attendees per group on purpose. So we prefer to multiply the group on the same workshop rather than having too many people, because we really want to have this individual approach. So that was the situation up to spring 2020. And of course, in March last year, everything changed. And for us, actually, maybe you heard about that, but from March 17th, if I remember well, the entire lockdown was decided for France. And President Macron immediately announced that the universities would be closed up to September 2020. So we had no choice, considering that all of our sessions were delivered face-to-face. We have no choice to completely redesign what we were doing. Stopping this faculty development initiative was out of question, especially because the time was making faculty development more relevant than ever. So we worked a lot, and we decided to have an online switch, an entire online switch of something that was 100% face-to-face before, almost like any other classes, basically. So to go back on the different assets I was discussing just before, what did we do? Basically, we did two things. First, we adapted the program, meaning that we decided to cover new topics that we didn't cover so much before to fit with the needs of the faculties. And basically, we added a lot of things about the way to deliver classes online, to produce contents that were suitable to be used in distance learning. So an entire set of new workshops, new sessions that were designed especially for this new faculty development, this new form of our faculty development initiative. Second thing that we did was to adapt the contents themselves. It was actually out of question for us just to sit in front of the webcam and to do exactly the same thing that we would have done face-to-face remotely. It was out of question to do that. We perfectly knew that switching to online was something that was pretty challenging in terms of engagement of the attendees. And so we thought a lot about that, and basically we decided to completely redesign the sessions beyond the topics they were covering. We decided to completely redesign the session, and basically if the program was redesigned to fit the new needs, the contents themselves were redesigned to make them suitable and interactive, really, really interactive. As a result, beside the program that was already existing, we designed an entire course which was called, and which is still called actually, Teaching with Digital. Okay, so this course is consisting of 10 modules that are covering the concept and the fundamentals of online and hybrid teaching, including the assessments, the design of what we call learning capsules, the production of the pedagogical contents, including slideshow design, the screencast, the mind mapping, the good ways to use video conferencing and collaborative platforms to enhance the interactivity with the students. And finally, the design activities, the activities design, class activity design, and the articulation with the physical spaces as soon as we could go back, at least partially, to face-to-face. So that was the program that we scheduled. And actually, one of the first lessons that we had by having that online instead of face-to-face is that it gave it a lot of agility. I mean by that, for instance, when we were giving the session about the learning capsules, if there was a need about that, we could schedule the day after or the same afternoon a Q&A session and a second workshop if the people wanted to go further in terms of practice. Same thing for the slideshow design. I gave that workshop many times, and some people say, we would like to do that more. We're like, okay, but when we are online, there is no room to book anything. You just say, okay, let's meet again at the lunchtime tomorrow, and we do that together. So a lot of agility, and that was a first lesson, which was pretty interesting for us, actually, regarding this program. In 2020, this program scored almost 800 attendees from 17 universities, which was quite huge, actually, and we conducted a lot of assessment. So first, this is the kind of assessment that we were conducting even before when we were face-to-face about the quality of the things that we are delivering, and it was still pretty good. We didn't worry so much about that. But this time, regarding the switch to online, we decided to have a fourth question, which was especially about this new online delivery way of our faculty development session. And the question was, what is your appreciation of video conferencing format? And the results were outstanding. We honestly were pretty surprised, happily surprised by that, 96%. So people definitely appreciated that new modality of delivering the faculty development session. And especially they highlighted something that really were careful about, and it was very satisfying for us to see that they were equal about that. It was super interactive. And once again, the people really felt that interactivity. And on our side, it was, for instance, meaning that there was never more than 10 minutes without any actions from the attendees. So we never stopped asking them things, interacting through the chat, interacting through exercises. And this is something that really our attendees felt. So that was a wonderful laboratory for us, basically beyond all the dramatic dimensions of the pandemic, of course, but for us, it was a wonderful laboratory because we could have discussions, very extensive discussions, the perspective about the evolutions of the teaching and learning practices. And it brought us to a couple of outcomes that were actually verified. Since I'm doing my study here at Kyoto University between France and Japan, I felt the same thing from my Japanese colleagues. And I would like to discuss those outcomes from the faculty's point of view once again. First, definitely there has been a mindset shifting for many of the faculties. I wouldn't say all of them, but for many of them. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, for instance, through our faculty development session, at the beginning, we had many people attending because basically they had no choice. And they said that very freely, very frankly. They say, okay, I'm coming not because I especially wanted to come. I'm coming because I know that in 2 weeks I will have to switch my entire class online and I need some help. So I heard that you are doing things about that. I'm not especially happy to be here, but I had to come. And actually, such kind of testimonies really, really evolved through the time. We started that once again in March 2020. Maybe 6 months later, from September, October, the type of testimonies that we had, the type of discussions that we had with the people was completely different in the sense that they were saying, oh, finally, I understood through your session that I could change few things in a relevant way in my teaching practice. So the mindset shifting definitely, at least for a part of the faculties, was a reality. And to give you some of the testimonies that we had, for instance, some of them told us the digital tools were representing a bigger challenge than the new practices themselves. So basically, those faculties told us that finally it was okay for me to evolve in my practice, in my teaching practice. I was more worrying about the way to use the digital tools and to have enough support to use them. So that is very interesting, because maybe 1 or 2 years before they would have said, I don't want to change my practice because my practice is my practice. But suddenly they realized that it was relevant to think about making the teaching practices evolving. And basically the key challenge for them was rather on the practice of digital tools. Second testimony that we have, I would like to mention here, the switch to remote teaching made me aware of the limitations of the face-to-face one. So that's very interesting because people progressively thought that having a part, I'm not saying entirely, but having a part of the classes online was something that could have sense, could have some relevancy for the students and for the teachers. And the testimony that we have here is really representative of that trend. So the mindset shifting is definitely something that we felt completely from a part of the faculties, and it led to something that looks like a reflexive approach. It made possible for those faculties not only to consider things differently after the pandemic, but also to reconsider what they were doing since years. And for that, I would like to give you another testimony that we had, which is this: we should re-evaluate the relevancy of the face-to-face delivery of some activities. So once again, the idea is not saying that everything should stay online forever. It's just that some of our faculties told us, maybe through the things I understood since I had to switch online, I could say that in a sustainable way, at the middle or the long term, it could be interesting to keep some of my teaching activities in that format, besides some other activities that would go back to face-to-face, but that should have a new meaning because they are face-to-face. So this reflexive approach also was something pretty new. And basically those two things, the mindset shifting and the reflexive approach that we felt, brought us to a sort of this conclusion, which is that if in the pandemic situation, most of the teaching activities were remote, the post-pandemic forecast could be this, something that would be a hybrid between face-to-face and remote, from the teacher's point of view, from the faculty's point of view, considering the experience that they had during the pandemic. And once again, I'm talking about hybrid. I'm not saying that everything has to stay remote, not at all. Hybrid, so taking the best of the face-to-face and the remote modalities. So that's a perspective that we could have from the faculty's point of view. Now, I would like to discuss about the institutional stakes. Institutional stakes, meaning on the national, at the national level, the things from the ministries, and also the institution stakeholders level as well. So I was mentioning just before that one of the perspectives that we could have, considering the feedbacks and the testimonies that we had from the faculties, could be to, after the pandemic, which was almost 100% remote, to have a post-pandemic situation that could be a hybrid one, okay? But very quickly, we noticed, and I noticed through the interviews that I had with stakeholders, national and local stakeholders, that actually the perspective, the post-pandemic perspective, is rather, on their point of view, a back to face-to-face. And this is maybe something that you also felt on your side. This back to face-to-face, basically, it seems to be motivated by different reasons that I would like to discuss with you now. First, the issues in terms of student mental health. So, of course, this is something obviously very important, and there were quite dramatic situations about that everywhere in France, in Japan, everywhere. And this is a huge problem. This is a major issue, having the students spending most of the time in front of the screen, the digital fatigue, the isolation, and no social interaction. So this is something very important. And it's been in a very obvious way raised as a key reason to go back to face-to-face as soon as possible from the stakeholders. Second reason is that the switch to online that has been provoked by the pandemic involved quite a lot of costs and organizational transformation in terms of IT. Buying licenses for video conferencing systems, for instance, extending the network capacity to allow an intensive use of this video conferencing system, expanding the capacity of the online platform. So that was pretty costly. And this is something that, of course, is not so obvious to make sustainable on a financial point of view. So this is the second reason why face-to-face is quite promoted as a short term. Third reason, and this is, I would say, more obvious in Japan. It's more obvious in Japan than in France, but it's different as well. The question of the value of higher education. What do I mean by that? I mean that in the mixed private-public system, the higher education system in Japan, especially in private universities, some families seem to have been complaining about having to pay the same tuition fees for classes that were delivered online rather than face-to-face. So it seems that some of the families were not accepting easily that the delivery online would have the same value in terms of quality, in terms of relevancy than the face-to-face one, and therefore they shouldn't have to pay the same tuition fees. It's something, as I said, which is pretty different in France because the tuition fees are not the same, they are cheaper basically. And the question of higher education value in France was rather raised in terms of value of the diploma. There were a lot of worries, and there are still a lot of concerns about the recognition of the diploma that the students may have from 2020 or 2021. From some employers that could say, okay, like you have a diploma which was given to you during the pandemic, so it doesn't have the same value. But overall, there was this question of the higher education value, which could be a third reason for the stakeholders to push for a comeback to a face-to-face situation as soon as possible. So once again, pandemic situation, almost entirely remote. Post-pandemic, we had this forecast from the faculties that would be hybrid, and finally, when we take into consideration the point of view of the stakeholders, it will be on the short term very likely back to a face-to-face. And this is also something that is highly promoted by the Japanese Monkasho, by the NEXT, and by the French Ministry of Higher Education and Research. So now, last part I would like to discuss before having the break is typically the forecasts that we could have for the post-COVID, considering the things that we just discussed. And rather than discussing the post-COVID forecast, I would discuss the post-COVID middle-term forecasts, because as I just said, very likely the short-term forecast will be a face-to-face comeback, a restoration of the face-to-face. But let's project ourselves a little bit farther and let's imagine what could be the middle-term forecast. So as I said, short-term should be very likely this post-pandemic face-to-face. But if we go back to some of the reasons, of some of the observations that we had from the faculties and the stakeholders, once again, we have this from the faculties, this mindset shifting, this reflexive approach, and which definitely unlocked something from many of the faculties that now are more keen to consider things that they wouldn't have considered before in terms of evolution of the teaching practices. Once again, many of them felt completely relevant to keep some of their teaching activities online for very tangible reasons. So this is something very important. If we go back to the reasons that were raised and that are raised by the stakeholders about the return to face-to-face, if I stop again on the student mental health, once again, there are very dramatic situations about that, but if some of the interviews I could have were pretty interesting in the sense that I would like to give you one of the testimonies. Learning is a social activity, and this is certainly the biggest lack in the current situation. So some students told me, basically, we are not criticizing that some, not all of them, but some of our classes could be delivered online. That's pretty okay for us. And sometimes it's even convenient to have a video recording, a perfect video recording of a lecture rather than trying to find a seat in a lecture room and trying to listen, trying to watch the slide. It's much more comfortable to have it pre-recording on the video, and they really acknowledge that. But what they say, and this is something also that is still feeding the student mental health issues, is the lack of social activities. What they ask is to have situations, have opportunities to work together, and to have this sort of mutual motivation, mutual engagement by working together. So this is something that is pretty important regarding the student mental health. On the higher education value, and once again, going back to the quite specific situation of the private universities in Japan that are facing a huge competition. This is not something that national universities are experiencing so much, especially not Todai or Kyodai, but for private universities, there is this competition, which is something extremely important in Japan. And finally, if at the first look, those universities are facing these questions from the parents that are saying, okay, why do we have to pay tuition fees, the same tuition fees than before, as soon as the classes are delivered for most of them online? Basically, we could switch that argument to say, okay, for some universities, it could be something that make a difference to say, okay, on purpose, we are doing our delivery in a hybrid way, taking the best of the face-to-face modality and the remote modality to get the best of both of them and have the best teaching and learning experience for the students. So basically, we could switch this part of distance learning to something that would be a benefit than something to questions in terms of higher education value. But beyond all this, what I felt through the interview that I've been conducting since several months now is that one of the biggest problems that the stakeholders have regarding that switch to online learning is that it was too sudden and too entire. It was almost 100%. And that completely raised the question of a reconception of the university. What do I mean by that? I mean by that the basic conception of a university is a location that has a border, okay? And that border is defining the place in which the classes will be given, will be delivered. Beyond that, there is a temporality. The university is choosing the time when the class will be given. So you have to come to the campus from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. and you're going to get your class. And this control, what I'm indicated here as a control of the spatiality and the temporality of the pedagogical act, is something that has been completely shaken by the pandemic. It completely blown away this border to say you have to come to the campus and you have to be on the campus on that time, because suddenly the students were able to get their classes wherever they want and sometimes whenever they want, if it was pre-recorded classes. So this border has been completely blown away temporarily, and I think this is one of the reasons why for some stakeholders it was too sudden and maybe too brutal to say, okay, we have to completely have a reconception of the university, which is maybe too fast, basically. So let's go back to our famous face-to-face remote axis, post-pandemic situation. So once again, at the short term, back to face-to-face, it's pretty likely. But at the middle term, shall we imagine finally, considering what I just said, that we finally could have this hybrid configuration that was especially promoted by the faculties in the testimonies I had from them? But to discuss that, actually, we have to take into consideration not only this face-to-face remote axis, but the second axis, which is this one, the synchronous asynchronous axis. Why? Because basically the typologies of teaching activities that have been delivered evolved beyond their modality, beyond the question of face-to-face or remote. It's the typology of activities that have been changing quite a lot. And if we take the pre-pandemic situation, basically we had for most of the teaching activities, all of them basically were face-to-face and delivered in a synchronous way, meaning that the teachers were facing the students at the same time in the same place, okay, face-to-face. Few of the teachers, usually the most innovative ones, were complementing this by online contents delivered, so in a remote way, obviously, and in an asynchronous way, meaning basically meaning that they were using online platforms to give some complementary contents, or sometimes beyond that, flipped classrooms. What happened at the time of the pandemic? That basically what was face-to-face synchronous before became remote synchronous, okay? So that was the basic switch we all experienced. But beyond that, and this is an observation that I had since now several months, the part of asynchronous activities grew up, meaning that more and more teachers decided to use those online platforms to propose, in complement of the synchronous activities, they had some asynchronous resources that the students may work on. So that was the pandemic situation. Now let's go back to the post-pandemic situation. What will happen? At the short term, as we said, basically it's going to be a go back to the face-to-face for the synchronous activities. This is what we just discussed. There will still be some remaining asynchronous remote activity, but what I do think is that the relevancy of those asynchronous activities has been acknowledged enough by the faculties, and this is something I saw from my interviews, to make them sustainable, and not only in a remote way, but maybe also in a face-to-face way. And that could be one of the newest things that we could see in the middle term post-pandemic situation, having more systematically asynchronous activities, and this is brand new, face-to-face. So to do all this, and after that we're going to have the break, basically we have to connect all those activities with learning environments. And what we could say is basically that the remote asynchronous activities were and will still be enabled by digital learning environments, online platforms. Okay, that will not change, and it's been proven as being quite efficient during the pandemic. But the question of the activities that we will do face-to-face at the middle term, and once again, having in mind this question of reconsidering what we do face-to-face compared to online, compared to remote, and giving a new meaning, giving a new added to the face-to-face activities, it would bring us to this question of the physical learning environment, and having physical learning environment that would give something more than what the people could do in a distant way. And basically, just to finish before the break, I would like to give you, once again, a testimony that I was mentioning before. We should reevaluate the relevancy of the face-to-face delivery of some activities compared to their distance counterparts. Okay, so what would make something better in face-to-face? And indeed, we can translate that testimony that way. We need to ensure a value added to the face-to-face activities. So I would like to propose you to have the break, and after that, we're going to discuss the type of physical environment that could give us such kind of value added to the face-to-face activities.
Thank you, John. Can I suggest that just before we take a break, we see if anyone's got any questions about what you've talked about so far. So I think you've put some kind of interesting and provocative ideas here, and they're kind of relevant to everyone who's involved in educating, in thinking about the future facing us as we move to this post-pandemic situation. So are there questions at this point, either related to what John said in his experience, or related to concepts on this, or suggestions or ideas about how things may be different or different experiences? So please go ahead if anyone has anything they'd like to contribute at this point. Yeah, Ewan, sure.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your for the talk. It's really, really interesting. Can I just, I was wondering, you're talking about the switch to online and then perhaps a return to a more in-person, face-to-face kind of situation. I was wondering if in anywhere you've been, or the people you've been talking to, if anything's come up about accessibility, because of course, being online has for some people been a huge advantage. They've been able to access learning that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to. Is this something that people are still talking about? Is this being taken into account when people are talking about the switch back to in-person education?
It's definitely, Yuan, is definitely taken into consideration by the faculties, having this progressive acceptation of the distance learning. It's one of the parts that they were mentioning, making the education more accessible. Yeah, definitely, that's completely true.
Right, thank you.
And on that, what about at the more institutional levels, though? How is that the accessibility question addressed there? Because I think it's has a pretty big impact.
I heard that definitely more from the faculties than from the stakeholders.
Okay, so you've not heard, so that's missing to some extent from the discussions. I guess the drivers are primarily different, and but it's a little concerning to hear, because I think as Ewan was kind of saying, this provides an opportunity to increase access in ways that would be very, very difficult to achieve, you know, for various reasons, not least financially, through physical environment. So it's interesting. It would be interesting to see where this is being discussed and if it's being discussed. Yeah.
That once again, Johnny, this might be something taken more into consideration in the middle-term perspective of the stakeholders as well. First, you know, I think there is this question of, I would say, making the switch more mature. It's been too sudden and too brutal to be accepted as it was for the stakeholders, I think. Basically.
Yeah, we want it to evolve on our terms, not the pandemic
exactly
terms, right?
It's exactly that. It's exactly that. And I was writing a paper a few days ago. I was talking about mature, having this switch, making the switch mature. And I think, like you said, it was just not, they didn't control what happened. But it would be much more acceptable if they have the control of the pace and what would change at what moments. And this is one of the reasons why I think they are more keen to consider the evolution in the middle term, I guess, including the accessibility matters, of course.
Yeah, I guess it very much affects the optics, because if you can, if you look like you're responding, you know, emergency response to something, then the stakeholders have a very different view than if you are, you know, strategically evolving something for a given purpose. So I guess it's largely about how you present it to students, to parents, to everybody. Yeah. So I can see that makes sense. Yeah.
Completely.
Are there other questions or comments or? Okay, if not, then John, what do you propose for the break? How long before we continue?
After that, I will have something like 20 minutes remaining, 25 minutes remaining.
Okay, so, well, let's take, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So let's resume at 6:25. Is that right? And then we'll have your 25-minute session, and then we should be able to wrap things up and discuss, and maybe we'll be able to finish by 7, which I think would be good for everybody's schedule.
Cool. Okay, 6:25.
Okay, so we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's 25 past, so welcome back. John's gonna continue now with the second part of his presentation, and then we'll have some opportunities at the end for a little more discussion. And I'd, very much like to hear different perspectives on this from different people. So please feel free later to share your thoughts on many of these issues. Okay.
Thank you, Johnny. So just before the break, we were discussing about that post-pandemic middle-term perspective in which we would have asynchronous remote activities that we could do through the digital learning environment that we already used quite a lot during the pandemic, and having new kinds of value-added face-to-face activities that would need to use new kind enabling such kind of value-added physical learning environments. So for this, I would like now to discuss the evolution of the physical learning environment. So once again, it's a topic which is very important for me since 2016, as Johnny was mentioning during the introduction, because I'm running an international comparative study of those learning spaces since then. And basically, I would like to highlight that we have 4 main categories of those physical learning spaces. So usually it's shortened in learning spaces, but we are indeed talking about physical learning spaces. We have the active learning classrooms that usually are representing a new generation of classroom or small lecture room. The collaborative lecture theaters that are the new generation of lecture theaters, learning commons and learning centers. We have 2 big families for that. The formal spaces in which we have the active learning classrooms and the collaborative lecture theaters, in the sense that they involve a direct interaction with the teacher. So these definitely it's made for synchronous activities. And the informal spaces in which we have the learning commons and the learning centers, that on their side are more designed to make the students able to work by themselves or in groups, but without the involvement of a teacher. So let's see first the trends around the active learning classrooms. I would like to highlight when we discuss about active learning classrooms that you can have a quite important variety of layouts. This one, for instance, is from University of Washington in Seattle, USA. And as you may see, the table, as you may guess, at least the tables are not moving, but they are embedding quite a lot of technology in the sense that for each table, we have a screen that can be shared among the group. You have the sharing system in the middle of the table. So this room is quite focused on the interactivity through the screens, so screen sharing in the group between the tables. That's something that is not so flexible in terms of layout. This is in Kyushu University, in the new campus of Kyushu University in Fukuoka, and it's actually much more flexible in terms of layout, but it has less technology, so it's more focused on the way you can configure the space, basically. So it's something very, very flexible. We are here in Melbourne. That example is very interesting because it's mixing movable furnishing and fixed furnishing, and it's mixing technology such as the video wall that you have on the bottom left, and also low-tech specificities, as you may guess from the shiny white surface that you have on the table. Is actually a whiteboard. On the table, you have a whiteboard, a completely analog whiteboard on which the students can write directly with everyday life pen. So it's really mixing high-tech and low-tech equally as movable and fixed furnishing. This is at the University of British Columbia in Canada, in Vancouver. This is in Kyushu Institute of Technology. You may recognize some of the furnishing that you have also at the CALS, the Komaba campus at Tolai. And this is in Perth in Australia. So as you may see, quite different configurations. It's quite a lot of variety in terms of design. So I wanted to mention that because sometimes people are saying to make an active learning classrooms, you need tables that can move and a lot of technology. It's a little bit more complicated than that, or more various than that. But beyond the generic active learning classrooms we just saw through some key examples, I would like to mention that one of the key trends we observed since a couple of years now is quite interesting in the sense that we are talking about specialized active learning classrooms. So for that, we're gonna keep the key assets of an active learning classrooms and put them in something that is focused on precise discipline. For instance, here, chemistry. This is McGill in Canada, in Montreal. This is an active learning classrooms only designed for chemistry. This is also in McGill for geology. So it's still fostering on collaboration, collaborative activities, but specialized on precise discipline. This is for biology in the Colorado School of Mines next to Denver. This is a huge chemistry lab, also in active learning configuration in the University of Technology of Sydney in Australia. And you can have more forward-looking rooms such as this one in Perth, in Curtin University, using visualization devices and new technologies of visualization such as this or that, with we can interact with 3D screen, you can interact by gesture. But basically, it's quite interesting to see that evolution to specialized active learning classroom, because we had a discussion, Johnny and I, a few months ago about doing chemistry practice during the pandemic. Of course, it's something that was very challenging. And definitely at the middle-term perspective, middle-term post-pandemic perspective, having such kind of chemistry lab would be something that is really bringing a value added compared to the distance activities. Second category, the collaborative lecture theaters. I would like to mention that this is the kind of learning spaces is by far the less visible on the campuses. Despite very nice examples, I will give you some of them right here. This one is in Vancouver, University of British Columbia. So they completely refurbished the slope to put those big steps in which you have collaborative tables. This one is in Newcastle, 200 kilometers from Sydney in Australia. You have those diner type tables like this. This is in Queensland University of Technology. Wonderful design. It's a school of design, actually, this lecture room. So it's also the reason why it's pretty unique in terms of layout. And this in Melbourne, in the same facility we had before in the interesting mixed configuration active learning classroom. So we have very nice examples. But once again, by far, the collaborative lecture theaters is the kind of learning spaces that you can find less on the campuses. And I do think personally that this is reflecting the fact that the traditional lectures is not the kind of teaching practice that even stakeholders are giving them the biggest future, I think. And this is maybe the reason why there is not so much investment on such kind of new facilities as well. That is something that we could discuss afterwards. But beyond the question of active learning classrooms and collaborative lecture theaters, and once again, I was mentioning that as being formal spaces in the sense they involve an interaction, direct interaction with the teacher, I would like now to switch the informal spaces, the learning commons and the learning centers. First, to say that just within the last 5 years, once again, I started my study on learning spaces in 2016. In 2016, any stakeholders discussing about active learning learning space for the campus was first thinking about active learning classroom. The active learning classroom was almost systematically the entry point of any strategy related to learning space. And now it's really switched to the informal spaces. Now, when I'm discussing with stakeholders, they talk very spontaneously about learning commons and learning centers. There are reasons for that, and one of the reasons is actually given by research. I would like to show you the result of a study that has been conducted in 2016 in Sydney, in Australia, on a cohort of 2,000 students. And actually, that study shown that those 2,000 students within 1 year, cumulated, they spent 168,000 hours in formal spaces, 140,000 hours in virtual spaces. This was the old world before the pandemic. And as you may guess, 420,000 hours in informal spaces, say that in another terms, in learning commons. So of course, when a stakeholder is watching such kind of numbers, it's pretty impactful in terms of which decision they're gonna make, or he or she's gonna make for budgeting new spaces. So when we talk about those informal learning spaces, learning commons, learning centers, how do they look like? We are here in Auckland, New Zealand. So this is the intersection of the three parts of a campus that was existing before. So a few years ago, it was just a plaza, and it became such kind of informal space with different kind of subspaces that the students can use for different kind of learning activities. This new generation of libraries, this is Seikei library next to Tokyo, wonderful design, of course, with those glass planets that are actually collaborative spaces for the students. This is once again Newcastle next to Sydney in Australia. We have here a university in Hiroshima. We have Queensland University of Technology, the same than the nice lecture theater just before. We have here Kanda University of International Study in Chiba, which is very interesting in terms of design because it's really reflecting a kind of coffee shop, as you may guess. This is the library of Nanyang University in Singapore. It's quite interesting because all the bookshelves have been moved to the last floor. You may guess them on the last floor, back of the peak. And the entrance of the library is this lecture theater that is very versatile in terms of use. It can be used as a lecture theater, it can be used as an event place, and it can be used as an informal space. There's a lot of power plugs everywhere, so it's very versatile, quite interesting. This is also a new generation of libraries, certainly one of the reference ones in North America right now is North Carolina State University in Raleigh. This is an atrium-shaped informal space in the University of Melbourne in Australia. This is a very nice learning commons that I like quite a lot in Japan, in Osaka International University. It's not so big, but the design is very good with some very relevant subspaces. And last example, future University of Hakodate, another Japanese example, which for a part of the campus is designed as an open space like this. So it's quite interesting. It's really reflecting a set of pedagogical practices that are really innovative, focused on project-based learning. And the circles that you have, the three circles that you have on the right are actually the lecture rooms. So it's very, very open. So these are some examples of those four main families of spaces. And I would like to finish that overlook on the innovative physical learning spaces by mentioning that there is a fifth family that progressively appears on the campuses, which actually is inserted between the formal spaces and the informal spaces. We call that the transitional spaces. So it's really something in the between. It basically creates a physical and functional continuity of the learning spaces all across the campuses. What do I mean by that? I mean that it looks like such kind of things. So this is at the entrance of the learning center at University of Washington in Seattle. You have this space in which the students can stop 10, 15, 20 minutes, work on few things, charge the battery of the laptop or the tablet, and then move to the learning center or go outside to do something else. Here at Edith Cowan University in Perth in Australia, same thing. At the entrance of the library, you have those small spaces that the students can use for a couple of minutes. It might be observed also through refurbishing of stairs. The stairs are becoming, in that case, a learning space. This is in Adelaide in Australia, Flinders University. This is the Colorado School of Mine in Denver, Colorado. So as you may see, a part of the stair became sort of informal space, and actually it's a transitional space because students don't stay so much, but it's very convenient for a short period of working. This is once again Kanda University of International Study in Chiba, in which the stair also have been refurbished. This kind of lounge, Flinders University, once again in Adelaide. This in Kobe, this in Curtin University in Perth, or that's at Monash University in Melbourne. Very interesting. So you may see such kind of spaces more and more all across the campuses, and it actually just allows the students to work for a short period of time instead of lying down on the floor or using the hallways or such kind of things. So this is the kind of answer that we could give to that perspective, the kind of meaning we could give to that perspective of a new generation, a new kind of face-to-face activities that are bringing a value added at the middle term perspective of the post-pandemic. So to finish that speech, I would like now to combine all this to imagine a pedagogical sequence. So let's imagine that we have a very short pedagogical sequence, such as this one, in which we will have 5 steps. And these 5 steps, we will have synchronous activities, asynchronous activities, as we just said, okay? And so we have these 5 steps. But now we could imagine that actually we are switching from one typology of activities to the other one. For instance, first, we could have a lecture which is synchronous using slideshows as a pedagogical contents. Second, we could do that asynchronously using documents, screencasts, or mind mapping, interactive mind mappings. Third, we could go back to synchronous way, having a practice workshop, Q&A, and using the mind mapping the students were working on the previous step. Again, once synchronous on the 4th step, asynchronous once again using documents and new screencast, and a final session, which would be a Q&A workshop, synchronous. Okay, so this would be a nice way, an interesting way to mix synchronous and asynchronous activities, face-to-face and remote. Face-to-face and remote, because now we can connect learning environments to all this. For instance, to say that the first step, which is a lecture, introduction lecture using slideshow, it could be through video conferencing or using a collaborative lecture theater or an active learning classroom if there is not such a big number of students. We could use for the second synchronous activity a video conferencing, because we could imagine that it's more convenient and more relevant for the kind of things that we're going to do. And the final workshop, Q&A workshop, could be done in an active learning classroom because it's really enhancing the collaboration and the discussion and the interactivity. Asynchronously, we could use all the spaces I was just discussing, the informal ones, learning commons and learning centers, and of course the transitional space in which the students could have these asynchronous activities for short times should they need to. So this is something that is really reflecting that trend of mixing face-to-face and remote, the first axis, and synchronous, asynchronous by using different kind of learning environments and different kind of pedagogical contents. And so this is going to be my last word. Of course, for all that, we are involving different kind of contents, enhanced slideshow, mind mapping, screencast, so video captions. So this may be a kind of topic to discuss in the upcoming workshops, but it's of course very important to connect the kind of contents that we're going to use to the kind of activities we're going to have and the kind of environments we're going to use for such kind of activities. These are the things I wanted to tell you today about those post-pandemic perspective, and now I would be more than happy to answer your questions after the discussion. Thank you very much.